The economic world is divided between mainstream economists and their critics, heterodox economists. Heterodox economists usually think of themselves as part of a clearly defined tradition, Marxism, feminism, institutionalism, to name just a few. Meanwhile, mainstream economics is often described as neoclassical, by which the users of the term mean to say that mainstream economists rely on theories articulated in the late 19th century. But is economics today really still that close to what it was in the late 1800s? Asked differently, does the term neoclassical economics accurately capture what mainstream economists do? Today, I want to show you an example of how to use data science to answer questions that are relevant to scholars in the humanities. One test we can perform to see if the term neoclassical economics is a good one to describe the mainstream is to see who uses it. Do mainstream economists themselves describe their work as neoclassical, or is the term only used by those who criticize the mainstream, by heterodox economists? To find an answer to this question, I selected 5 mainstream journals and 10 heterodox journals. The mainstream selection was easy. It is comprised of the so-called Big Five, the 5 most prestigious English language journals in economics. For the heterodox journals, I chose 10, both to ensure that I survey a broad range of heterodox thought and to match the volume of the Big Five. The 10 heterodox journals contain a total of 14,610 articles between 1990 and 2020, and the mainstream journals 14,614. I included data from the 1970s and 80s as well, but the picture is slightly less clear in that earlier period because many heterodox journals were only founded in the 1980s and 90s. Next, I charted the frequency with which the term neoclassical economics appears relative to the total output of each journal over time. Here are the results for 4 of the 10 heterodox journals. We see that the term regularly appears in the journals, reaching heights of 23 and 24%. The American Journal of Economics and Sociology boasts the most spectacular spike in 2013, when neoclassical economics appeared in 46.7% of the total number of articles. A quick side note. I included the term neoclassical synthesis in my study, as you can see here. The neoclassical synthesis was an event in the middle of the 20th century that saw the joining of a version of Keynesian thought with neoclassical economics. I want to make sure here that economists who use the term neoclassical economics don't only use it to discuss this specific moment. I found very little indication that the two terms are correlated. But let's focus again on the term neoclassical economics. Here is its trajectory across all 10 heterodox journals. The trend confirms what we saw in many of the individual data sets. Overall, the term consistently appears in about 10 to 15% of the heterodox journals' output since at least the 1990s. Earlier data indicates that there may have been a spike in the 1970s, but since not all journals have data from this period, because many of them didn't exist yet, we have to treat that part of the data with caution. We also see that there is no correlation between neoclassical economics and the neoclassical synthesis. Let's now take a look at the mainstream journals, beginning with the American Economic Review. We immediately see that the term neoclassical economics barely appears in the journal. The highest frequency of appearance is 2.2% in 1983. But maybe that's not representative of the rest of the mainstream journals? How about Econometrica? Well, here neoclassical economics appearance is even more scarce, with no mention of the term at all for several years at a time. I will save you the trouble and just show you the frequency of all 5 mainstream journals combined. Again, the trend is clear. Neoclassical economics rarely makes it into the articles mainstream economists publish, hovering mostly around the 1% mark. To make the divergence abundantly clear, this chart contains both the frequency with which heterodox economists use the term neoclassical economics and the frequency for mainstream economists. It is quite striking that mainstream economists, who are allegedly the practitioners of neoclassical economics, do not seem to find the term particularly important, or at least it barely makes it into their vocabulary. Heterodox economists, on the other hand, use the term consistently and much more frequently. What we call things matters, because naming something means conceptualizing it. Put simply, once you have a word for something, you can think it. But our analysis shows that the term that is supposed to describe the content of mainstream economics is not quite capturing it, or at least its practitioners don't seem to think so. This does not mean that we should dispense with the term altogether. I'm suggesting that we restrict our usage of neoclassical economics to describe only that particular strand of economics in the late 19th and early 20th century, and recognize that today's mainstream economics has become something else, something that requires renaming.